The doorbell rang as I rushed into my grandmother's wooden house in Missoula, clutching a handmade book tied with twine. I'm Renee Foster, 23, always late, but never without a gift for her birthday. The room buzzed with family chatter glasses clinking over plates of food. I slid into a chair, hoping no one noticed my delay. Then my grandmother rose, her voice piercing the noise like a dart. "Renee, do you like the bookstore I left you?" The question struck like lightning. My breath caught. Bookstore? What bookstore? My mind scrambled, finding no answers. I don't know what you're talking about. I stammered, my voice faltering. All eyes snapped to my stepfather and mom. His hand froze, a napkin crumpling in his fist. Her face drained of color, her glass trembling. The silence was deafening, their guilt louder than words. My grandmother's gaze sharpened, pinning them like a hawk. "You didn't tell her," she demanded, her words slicing through the heavy air. My heart pounded. Something was terribly wrong. Their panicked glances screamed of a secret they'd hidden until this moment. Has a family secret ever flipped your life upside down? Share it in the comments and subscribe to follow my story. The next morning, I sat in my grandmother's warm kitchen, her question still echoing in my mind. The scent of coffee filled the air, but I barely noticed my thoughts tangled in last night's shock. I'm Renee Foster, 23, and my life has always felt like a shadow. Growing up, I was the odd one out, pushed aside in a house where my half-brother got all the attention. My biological father died when I was 5, a car accident that left a hole Mom never filled. She remarried quickly, and my stepfather moved in, bringing new rules and a cold distance. My half-brother Camden was born soon after their golden child. I was the leftover, the reminder of a past they wanted to forget. Mom would snap if I lingered too long at the dinner table, her eyes fixed on Camden's every move. "Go to your room," she'd say, her voice sharp. "Dad Russell." I called him, then barely looked at me, his focus on their new family. I found refuge in books, sneaking to the Missoula library after school. I shelved novels for minimum wage, saving every penny for college, dreaming of a career in publishing. Those stories were my escape worlds where I wasn't invisible. I'd spend hours reading under a dim desk lamp, imagining a life where I mattered. Grandma Lottie was different. She'd visit from her little house on the edge of town, slipping me paperbacks with notes tucked inside. "You're stronger than you know." She'd talk about my father, her son, his laugh, his love for stories. "He'd be proud of you," she'd whisper, her hand warm on mine. I clung to those moments, rare sparks in a childhood of being overlooked. But even Grandma's visits couldn't erase the sting of Mom's favoritism or Russell's indifference. Camden got new clothes, private tutors, a shiny bike. I got hand-me-downs and silence. That morning, Grandma Lottie sat across from me, her silver hair pulled back, her eyes steady. "Renee," she said, her voice low but firm, "there's something you need to know." I leaned forward, my coffee untouched. She slid a worn photo across the table, a man with my eyes standing outside a bookstore on Main Street. "Your father owned that store," she said. "He built it from nothing, poured his heart into it. When he died, I made sure it was yours. The papers were signed years ago, meant to be yours when you turned 18. My chest tightened. A bookstore mine. I stared at the photo, the sign reading Main Street Books in bold letters. But I never knew, I whispered, my voice shaking. Grandma's face hardened. "Your mother and Russell were supposed to tell you," she said, her words clipped. "They took it over, turned it into some coffee shop hybrid. They've been using the profits for themselves." I felt like the air had been sucked out of the room. Mom knew, Russell knew, they'd hidden it, built their comfortable life on something meant for me. I remembered their fancy vacations, Camden's new car, while I scraped by on library wages. "Why didn't you tell me sooner?" I asked, my throat tight. Grandma sighed, her eyes heavy. "I thought they'd done right by you. I trusted them. I was wrong." My hands clenched around the photo. My father's dream stolen. I saw flashes of my childhood mom brushing me off, Russell ignoring my questions, Camden oblivious to it all. The bookstore was my legacy, a piece of my father I never got to know. And they'd taken it. Anger surged, but so did something else, a spark of purpose. I wasn't the leftover kid anymore. I had a claim, a right, and I wasn't letting it go. Grandma reached across her hand, steadying mine. "You're not alone in this," she said. "I'll help you make it right." Her words were a lifeline, pulling me from the haze of betrayal. I nodded, my jaw set. Whatever it took, I'd uncover the truth about that bookstore, and what else they'd hidden from me. 2 days later, I confronted my parents in their cramped living room, my pulse racing. The air felt heavy, the faint hum of a TV in the background doing nothing to ease the tension. I stood across from Mom and Russell, my hands gripping the edge of a worn couch. Grandma Lottie sat beside me, her presence steady, a folder of papers clutched in her hands. I'd spent the last 2 days replaying her words about the bookstore my father's legacy meant for me. Now I wanted answers. "Why didn't you tell me about the bookstore?" I demanded, my voice sharp, cutting through the silence. Mom shifted in her chair. Her lips pursed, avoiding my gaze. Russell leaned back, arms crossed, his jaw tight. "It's not what you think," he said, his tone clipped like he was scolding a child. "We turned it into something better, a coffee shop and bookstore combo. It's making good money for the family." "For the family?" I snapped, my anger flaring. "Whose family?" I never saw a dime of it. I thought of my years scraping by, working late nights at the library while they bought Camden a new car. Russell's eyes narrowed, but he didn't respond. Mom finally looked up, her expression cold. "You're overreacting, Renee," she said, her voice dripping with dismissal. "You were too young to handle it." "We made the right call." My stomach twisted. Too young, I was 23, and the bookstore was mine at 18, according to Grandma Lottie. Her words from the kitchen echoed my father's dream stolen. I turned to Grandma, her face set like stone. "Show them," I said, my voice low but firm. She opened the folder, pulling out yellowed documents with crisp official stamps. "These are the transfer papers," she said, her tone unyielding. "Signed by my son, your father, leaving the bookstore to Renee. You had no right to touch it." Russell's face flushed, his fingers digging into the armrest. "Those are old papers," he said, his voice rising. "Things change. Businesses evolve. We did what was best." But his eyes darted to the documents, betraying his confidence. Mom scoffed, tossing her hair back. "You're making a scene over nothing," she said, her words slicing deeper than I expected. This was my mother, the one who should have fought for me, not against me. Her indifference hurt worse than Russell's excuses. I stepped closer, my hands shaking but my voice steady. "You lied to me," I said, staring at Mom. "You knew it was mine and let him turn it into your cash machine." She rolled her eyes, a gesture so familiar from my childhood when she'd brush off my questions or dreams. "Grow up, Renee," she said. "You wouldn't have known what to do with it." The room spun for a moment, her words a punch to the gut. My own mother choosing their comfort over my future. Grandma Lottie stood her height, commanding despite her age. "You betrayed your daughter?" she said, her voice low, aimed at Mom. "My son wanted Renee to have his legacy, and you stole it." She slid the papers across the coffee table, the sound sharp in the quiet room. I scanned them, my father's signature clear as day, naming me as the owner. The dates matched 5 years ago when I turned 18. They'd had years to tell me, years to make it right. Russell stood pacing now, his hands clenched. "This is ridiculous," he muttered. "We kept the business alive. You should be grateful." Grateful for stealing what was mine. I thought of my father, a man I barely knew, his bookstore, a piece of him I could have held on to. Instead, they'd turned it into a trendy cafe, pocketing the profits while I struggled. I locked eyes with Mom, searching for a hint of guilt, but found none. "You're my mother," I said, my voice breaking despite my resolve. "How could you do this?" She looked away, her silence louder than any answer. Grandma placed a hand on my shoulder, her touch grounding me. "We're not done here," she said, her eyes fixed on Russell and Mom. "You'll answer for this." I clutched the papers, my resolve hardening. They'd hidden my father's gift, built their life on my loss. But I wasn't the overlooked kid anymore. I'd fight for what was mine, no matter what it took. A week later, I drove through Missoula's snowy streets to a law office, gripping the documents. The transfer papers from Grandma Lottie felt heavy in my hands, their faded ink a lifeline to my father's legacy. I glanced at Grandma in the passenger seat, her face set with determination. Courtney, my childhood friend, sat in the back, her presence a quiet anchor. After that confrontation in my parents' living room, Bonnie's cold dismissal and Russell's weak excuses, I needed proof, something to make their betrayal undeniable. We stepped into the small office, the air sharp with the scent of old books and coffee. Michael, Grandma Lottie's friend and a lawyer with graying hair, greeted us with a firm handshake. "Let's see what we've got," he said, motioning to a polished desk stacked with files. I handed him the transfer papers, my fingers lingering on the edges. He spread them out, his eyes scanning the lines, pausing at my father's signature. Then he frowned, pulling a newer document from a folder, another transfer dated 2 years ago, with my name nowhere on it. "This isn't right," Michael said, his voice low, pointing to the signature on the newer paper. "It's forged. Your mother's name is scrawled here, but it doesn't match the original." My heart sank, though I wasn't surprised. Bonnie and Russell had turned my bookstore into their profit machine, and now this forgery. Grandma Lottie's hand tightened on her cane. "They had no right," she said, her words sharp, cutting through the room's stillness. Courtney leaned forward, her brow furrowed. "How could they fake it?" she asked, her voice steady but laced with anger. Michael flipped through more papers, pulling out bank records tied to the bookstore. "They didn't just take the store," he said, his tone grim. "There's a trust fund your father set up for your education, Renee. It's empty. Drained over the last 3 years." I froze, my breath catching. A trust fund. For me, I'd spent years working double shifts at the library, pinching pennies for college, while Bonnie and Russell lived comfortably. I pictured their new furniture, Camden's private school fees, their weekend getaways. My education, my future stolen. "How much was it?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Michael's eyes softened. $20,000, he said. "All gone." Grandma Lottie's face darkened, her knuckles white on her cane. "My son worked hard for that fund," she said, her voice trembling with fury. "He wanted Renee to have a chance to follow her dreams." I thought of my father, a man I only knew through Grandma's stories, his love for books, his hope for me. Bonnie. My own mother had taken that too. The betrayal cut deeper than I'd imagined, a wound that twisted with every new detail. Courtney reached for my hand, her grip firm. "They can't get away with this," she said, her eyes fierce. I nodded, my jaw tight. The forged signature, the drained fund, it was more than theft. It was a deliberate erasure of my father's wishes, of my place in his life. I'd trusted Bonnie to care to protect me, but she'd chosen herself, chosen Russell, chosen their life over mine. Michael leaned back, tapping a pen against the desk. "We can build a case," he said. "The forged signature is clear evidence, and the trust fund withdrawals leave a paper trail. But it won't be easy. They'll fight back, and it'll get messy." I thought of Bonnie's cold stare, her dismissive grow-up Renee from the confrontation. She'd fight not out of guilt, but to protect her image. Russell would too, with his smug excuses about family. I looked at the documents, my father's signature, a faint echo of a man I'd lost. "I'm ready," I said, my voice steady despite the ache in my chest. "Whatever it takes, I want what's mine." Grandma Lottie nodded, her eyes fierce with pride. "You're your father's daughter," she said, her words a quiet strength. Courtney squeezed my hand, her smile unwavering. "We're with you," she said. Michael gathered the papers, his expression resolute. "We'll start with a demand letter," he said. They'll have to answer for the forgery and the trust fund. This is just the beginning. I felt a spark of resolve sharper than my anger. Bonnie and Russell thought they could bury my father's legacy, but they'd underestimated me. The fight was coming, and I wouldn't back down. 10 days later, my phone lit up with vicious texts from my mother's friends. Greedy brat one read the words stinging like a slap. Another, "You're tearing your family apart." I stared at the screen, my stomach churning. Bonnie and Russell had taken their fight to social media, painting me as the villain. Posts on local Missoula groups called me selfish, accusing me of dragging my poor parents through the mud over a bookstore. Each notification felt like a fresh cut, but I wasn't surprised. Bonnie's cold dismissal in that cramped living room had shown me who she really was. I sat at Courtney's apartment scrolling through the posts. She leaned over my shoulder, her face tight with anger. "They're lying," Courtney said, her voice sharp as she grabbed her laptop. "We can prove it." She pulled up screenshots Russell's public post claiming I'd demanded the bookstore out of spite, Bonnie's comment calling me ungrateful. Courtney saved every word, her fingers flying across the keyboard. "This is slander," she said, her eyes fierce. "They're trying to turn the town against you." I nodded, my jaw clenched. The forged signature and drained trust fund were bad enough, but this public attack felt personal, a deliberate twist of the knife. I thought of my father's bookstore now, a trendy cafe, its shelves stripped of his legacy. Bonnie and Russell weren't just stealing, they were rewriting the story to make me the problem. Later that day, I met Patricia, my publishing professor, at a coffee shop near the university. She'd heard the rumors, seen the posts. "Don't let them shake you," Patricia said, her voice calm but firm, stirring her tea. "You're fighting for what's yours. People like that, they attack when they're scared." Her words steadied me, a reminder of why I'd started this. I'd spent years in the library dreaming of a career in books, and now my father's gift was within reach. I wouldn't let their lies stop me. Courtney sent me a folder of screenshots by evening, dozens of comments from Bonnie's friends, local business owners, even a former coworker of mine. "She's always been trouble," one wrote. "Thinks she's better than her family," said another. I felt the weight of their words, but Courtney's voice cut through. "We'll use this," she said, her tone fierce. "Michael can add it to the case. They're digging their own grave." I managed a small smile, grateful for her fire. With her and Patricia in my corner, I felt less alone. Then my phone rang. Camden's name flashed on the screen, and I hesitated. We hadn't spoken since the confrontation. I answered, my voice guarded. "Renee, please," he said, his tone desperate. "Just drop this. You're destroying Mom and Dad. We're a family." His words hit hard, not because they were true, but because he believed them. Camden, the golden child, had grown up with their love, their lies. He didn't know about the bookstore, the trust fund, the years I'd been pushed aside. "Family," I said, my voice low, shaking with anger. "They stole from me, Camden. From Dad, my real dad. You don't get it." He went quiet, then tried again. "Mom's crying every night. Russell's stressed. Can't we just talk it out?" I pictured Bonnie's cold stare, her, "Grow up, Renee. Talk it out." There was no talking with someone who'd betrayed me so completely. "No," I said, my voice firm. "They made their choice. I'm making mine." I hung up, my hands trembling. Camden's plea stung, but Bonnie's betrayal burned deeper. She was my mother, yet she'd chosen to protect her life with Russell over me, her own daughter. The social media posts, the lies, they were her way of fighting back. Not with truth, but with manipulation. I thought of my father, the bookstore he'd built, the trust fund he'd left. They'd taken it all, and now they wanted my silence. Courtney looked up from her laptop, her eyes sharp. "You okay?" she asked. I nodded, though my chest ached. "They're not winning this," I said, my voice steady. Patricia's advice echoed, "Stay focused, keep fighting." I opened my phone, saving another screenshot of Bonnie's post, each word fueling my resolve. The town might believe their lies for now, but I had the truth, documents, evidence, and people who believed in me. I thought of Grandma Lottie, her fierce pride, and Michael's calm assurance in the law office. This wasn't just about a bookstore anymore. It was about reclaiming my father's legacy, my future. Bonnie and Russell could spread their rumors, but I'd fight back with facts. Camden's words lingered, but I pushed them aside. Family wasn't about blood. It was about who stood by you. And I knew who mine was. A month later, I felt my stepfather's stare at Missoula's book festival, the crowd buzzing around me. The air was crisp, filled with the scent of printed pages and coffee from nearby stalls. I stood at a booth handing out flyers for a local author, my heart steady despite the weight of the last month. The festival, a celebration of Missoula's literary heart, was packed with book lovers, their chatter a welcome distraction. But Russell's presence, his eyes boring into me from across the square, sent a chill down my spine. He pushed through the crowd, his face set in a scowl, Bonnie trailing behind. "You're a disgrace, Renee," he shouted loud enough for heads to turn. "Destroying your family over some old bookstore." His voice carried over the murmurs, drawing gasps from nearby vendors. I froze, my fingers tightening around the flyers. The accusations weren't new. Bonnie and Russell had spread them online, but hearing them in public at a place I loved hit differently. Courtney, standing beside me, stepped forward, her voice sharp. "Back off, Russell," she said, her eyes flashing. "You're the one who lied." The crowd grew quiet, their attention shifting. Patricia, my professor, appeared from a nearby booth, her calm presence grounding. "This isn't the place," she said, her tone firm but measured, addressing Russell. "Renee's fighting for what's hers. You should be ashamed." I took a deep breath, my voice steady despite the knot in my chest. "You stole my father's bookstore," I said, meeting Russell's gaze. "You forged papers, drained my trust fund, and now you're playing the victim." My words hung in the air, clear and unwavering. A woman nearby whispered to her friend, her eyes wide. Others nodded, their expressions shifting from curiosity to support. Russell's face reddened, his hands clenched. "You don't know what you're talking about," he snapped, but his voice faltered, less certain under the crowd's scrutiny. Bonnie stood silent, her lips pursed, avoiding my eyes. Her silence was louder than Russell's shouts, a reminder of her betrayal. I thought of her dismissive "grow up, Renee," her lies online, her refusal to acknowledge my father's legacy. Then Grandma Lottie emerged from the crowd, her cane tapping against the pavement, her silver hair catching the sunlight. The murmurs stopped, all eyes on her. "Enough," she said, her voice low but commanding, silencing Russell mid-breath. "You've taken enough from my granddaughter." She turned to the crowd, her gaze fierce. "My son left that bookstore to Renee. Russell and her mother stole it, forged documents, and spent her inheritance. I've supported their family for years, loans, gifts more than they deserved. That ends today." A gasp rippled through the crowd. Russell's jaw dropped, his confidence crumbling. "Lottie, you can't." He started, but she cut him off, her voice like steel. "I can and I will. No more money. No more help. You're done." The words landed like a hammer, shifting the air. A vendor clapped, then another, and soon the crowd erupted in applause, their support washing over me like a wave. Bonnie's face paled, her hands trembling. She grabbed Russell's arm, whispering something, but he shook her off, his eyes darting as if searching for an escape. The crowd's cheers grew louder, a bookstore owner shouting, "We're with you, Renee." I felt a surge of strength, their voices drowning out the lies Bonnie and Russell had spread. Missoula, my town, was choosing me. Courtney grinned, nudging my shoulder. "Told you they'd see the truth," she said, her voice warm. Patricia placed a hand on my arm, her smile quiet but proud. "You stood your ground," she said. "That's power." I looked at Grandma Lottie, her eyes shining with fierce love. She'd fought for me since I was a child, her belief in me unwavering. This wasn't just about the bookstore. It was about reclaiming my place, my father's dream. Russell and Bonnie retreated, the crowd parting as they slipped away, their accusations now hollow. I watched them go, my heart steady. The festival resumed, voices and laughter filling the air, but I felt different, stronger seen. The people around me, strangers and friends, had heard the truth. They knew what Bonnie and Russell had done, and they stood with me. I picked up another flyer, my hands no longer shaking. The bookstore, my father's legacy, was still out of reach, but I was closer than ever. Grandma Lottie's decision had changed everything, stripping Russell of the power he'd clung to. Missoula was my home, and now it was my ally. The fight wasn't over, but I was ready for whatever came next. 2 months later, I stood outside the bookstore on Main Street, its new sign gleaming in the sunlight. Foster's books glowed in bold letters, a tribute to my father's dream. The court had ruled in my favor, the forged signatures and drained trust fund laid bare by Michael's relentless case. The judge's gavel had fallen, returning the bookstore to me, my father's legacy finally mine. I ran my fingers over the door's fresh paint, my heart swelling with a mix of pride and relief. After years of being pushed aside, I'd fought and won. Inside the space was a work in progress. I'd stripped away the cafe counters Russell had installed, replacing them with rows of shelves filled with novels, poetry, and local authors' works. Courtney was there, arranging a display of Montana writers, her laughter echoing as she teased me about my bossy organizing. "This place is you," she said, her eyes warm. "Your dad would love it." I smiled, picturing him here, his stories now alive in every corner. The victory hadn't come without cost. Russell's world had unraveled after the trial. An investigation into his business dealings sparked by Michael's findings revealed years of shady accounting. His employer fired him, and whispers of his downfall spread through Missoula. Bonnie Tate, once a fixture in local social circles, had faded from view. Her friends, who'd once flooded my phone with accusations, now avoided her, their loyalty crumbling under the weight of the truth. I'd heard she spent her days at home, her reputation in tatters, no longer the charming host of community events. Camden, my half-brother, faced his own reckoning. With Russell's income gone and Grandma Lottie's support cut off, he'd moved out, taking a job at a hardware store to pay his way. I felt a pang thinking of him, the boy who'd begged me to keep the peace. But his pleas couldn't erase Bonnie's betrayal, or the years I'd been overlooked. I'd offered him a chance to talk, to understand, but he'd chosen silence, staying loyal to them. That was his choice, just as fighting for my father's legacy was mine. Grandma Lottie visited often, her cane tapping as she inspected my progress. "You're doing him proud," she said one afternoon, her voice thick with emotion, as she traced a shelf of classic novels. Her decision at the book festival had shifted everything, stripping Russell of the financial safety net he'd relied on. Her strength, her love, had carried me through. Patricia stopped by, too, bringing students from her publishing class to help plan events. "You're building something real," she said, her smile steady. "Missoula needs this." The bookstore's first event, a reading by a local poet, drew a crowd that spilled onto the sidewalk. People packed the aisles, their faces lit with excitement as the poet's words filled the air. I stood at the back, watching neighbors, strangers, and friends from the festival who'd cheered me on. A vendor from that day, a woman with kind eyes, squeezed my arm. "This is what Main Street needed," she said. The room buzzed with energy, laughter, and the rustle of pages, a stark contrast to the sterile cafe it had been under Russell's control. I'd poured my savings into the renovations, every penny from my library job now fueling my dream. The trust fund was gone, but Michael was working to recover what he could. It didn't matter. The bookstore was mine, a piece of my father I could touch, a place to build my future. I planned more events, author signings, book clubs, workshops for young writers, each one drawing more of Missoula's heart. The community embraced me, their support a quiet apology for the rumors Bonnie and Russell had spread. Sometimes I'd catch myself staring at the sign "Foster's Books" and feel him, my father, in the quiet moments. I didn't need Bonnie's approval or Russell's excuses anymore. Camden's silence stung, but I had a new family, Grandma Lottie, Courtney, Patricia, and this town that had chosen me. The bookstore wasn't just a building, it was my proof that I could rise above their betrayal, that I could create something lasting. As the sun dipped low, casting a warm glow through the windows, I arranged a stack of books for the next event. Courtney called out planning a children's reading hour while Patricia suggested a guest speaker. I smiled, my heart full. The fight had been long, but standing here surrounded by books and people who believed in me, I knew I'd found my place. This was my beginning, and I was ready to write the next chapter. A year later, winter sunlight poured through the bookstore's windows, illuminating my new life. Foster's books hummed with energy, its shelves packed with stories, its air alive with the chatter of readers. The shop had become Missoula's literary heartbeat, a place where people gathered not just for books, but for connection. I stood behind the counter watching a group of teens browse a display of local authors, their laughter blending with the soft jazz playing overhead. This was my father's dream reborn through my hands, and it felt like home. Courtney swept in, balancing a tray of coffee for our evening book club. "We're out of chairs again," she said, grinning as she set the tray down. "You've turned this place into a zoo." I laughed, grateful for her constant presence, her humor a light through every challenge. Grandma Lottie sat in her favorite armchair by the window, flipping through a novel, her cane resting nearby. She'd become a fixture here, sharing stories of my father with anyone who'd listen. He'd be proud, she'd say, her eyes bright, and I believed her. Patricia dropped by weekly, her publishing students now regular volunteers, planning readings and workshops. "You've built a community," she told me one evening as we set up for a poetry slam. "This is what books do, bring people together." The shop hosted events nearly every night, author talks, writing groups, even a children's story hour that filled the aisles with wide-eyed kids. Missoula had embraced Foster's books, its doors open to anyone seeking stories or solace. I'd heard whispers about Bonnie and Russell, though I'd long since stopped caring. Bonnie Tate, once a social pillar, had retreated entirely, her name rarely mentioned in town. Russell, still reeling from his job loss, had moved to a smaller apartment, his reputation buried under the weight of his actions. Camden had sent a letter once, a clumsy attempt at reconciliation, asking to meet for Mom's sake. I read it then, tucked it away, unopened since. His loyalty to them, their betrayal of me, it was a wall too high to climb. I'd offered him a chance before, but he'd chosen their side. My heart no longer ached for what we'd never had. Grandma Lottie had been my rock, her fierce love a guidepost. She'd sold a rental property to fund the bookstore's early days, her belief in me unwavering. Courtney, with her sharp wit and endless ideas, had helped turn the shop into a cultural hub. Patricia's quiet wisdom had shaped my vision, her encouragement pushing me to dream bigger. And the community vendors, from the festival readers who'd stood by me, strangers who'd become friends, had shown me what family could mean. They were my chosen ones, the ones who'd stayed when blood ties failed. Sometimes late at night, I'd sit alone in the shop, the shelves casting long shadows. I'd think of my father, a man I knew through stories and this place he'd built. His legacy wasn't just the bookstore. It was the strength he'd passed to me, the courage to stand alone. Bonnie's cold dismissal, Russell's lies, Camden's pleas, they'd tried to dim that strength, but I'd found it again, brighter than ever. A young writer approached me one evening, nervous but eager, asking to host a reading. "This place feels safe," she said, clutching her notebook. I smiled, remembering my own dreams, the ones I'd fought to reclaim. "It's yours too," I told her, and meant it. Foster's books wasn't just mine. It belonged to everyone who walked through its doors, who found refuge in its pages. As winter deepened, the shop glowed against the snow outside its windows, warm with light. A crowd gathered for a holiday, reading, their voices rising in a chorus of shared stories. I looked out, seeing Grandma Lottie's proud nod, Courtney's mischievous grin, Patricia's quiet approval. This was my family, not bound by blood but by choice, by trust, by love that didn't demand my silence. I'd learned something through the long fight. My worth wasn't tied to Bonnie's approval or Russell's control. It wasn't in Camden's pleas or the family I'd lost. It was here in the life I'd built in the people who saw me for who I was. Foster's Books was more than a store. It was proof that I could rise, that I could choose who to love, who to trust. As the crowd applauded, I felt my father's presence, his dream alive in every word spoken here. I was free, and I was enough.